Look, I'm gonna tell you something that most women won't admit. There are 3 lies we tell ourselves when we're living a double life. And I lived all 3 of them for 9 years until Matthew found my Discord messages and everything fell apart. I know how this sounds already. I can see your face. But before you decide I'm some terrible person, you need to understand what was actually going on. I wasn't some cheater or liar by nature. I'm actually a really loyal person. People who know me know that about me. I compartmentalized, and I was really, really good at it. So if you want to subscribe for more stories like this, hit that button. But honestly, I hope you never need advice like this. The first lie I told myself was that it was just business, not personal. See, I'd been doing sex work since I was 18, started with this one client, let's call him David, and it was supposed to be temporary. Just until I got on my feet, you know? But David wasn't like other clients. He was consistent. He paid well. And somehow, 9 years later, I was still selling him pictures and videos, doing cam sessions with him every few weeks. When I started dating Matthew, we'd known each other through friends for years but never really connected until last year. I convinced myself that what I did with David was completely separate. Like Matthew was my real life. David was just work, business, a paycheck. I mean, I work as a surgical scheduler at the hospital, but that barely covers rent in this city. David's money was what let me actually live, you know? Buy nice clothes, go out with Matthew, not stress about every little expense. So when Matthew and I started getting serious, I just didn't mention it. Why would I? It had nothing to do with us. But here's where I was lying to myself. It wasn't just business. David and I talked, like really talked. He knew things about my life. I'd vent to him about work drama, about my family, about whatever was stressing me out. Not about Matthew, obviously. I kept those worlds separate. But still. David had been there through breakups, job changes, family stuff. He knew me in ways that felt weirdly intimate for someone who was supposed to be just a client. But I told myself it was professional, customer service, basically. Keeping the client happy. I remember one night, Matthew and I were lying in bed, and he was telling me about his day. He works in IT, nothing too exciting. And I realized I'd already told David the exact same story about my coworker being promoted over me. David had been more supportive about it too, if I'm being real. He actually listened. Matthew just kind of nodded and changed the subject to some work problem he was having. But that didn't mean anything, right? David was paying for my attention. Of course, he listened better. Whatever. The point is, I convinced myself there was this clean line between my 2 lives. Matthew got the girlfriend version of me. David got the business version. No overlap. No problem. The second lie was that timing mattered more than truth. Matthew and I had been dating for months, but we weren't official yet. Like we were exclusive, I think. But we hadn't had that conversation. You know how it is. You're basically together, but nobody wants to be the one to bring it up first. A couple weeks before we finally made it official, David messaged me about meeting up. In person. For $500. Now, I'd never actually met David in person. 9 years of online stuff, but never face-to-face. And honestly, I was curious. Not romantically, don't get it twisted. But after 9 years of talking to someone, you wonder what they're actually like in real life. Plus, $500. That's like 2 weeks of groceries and my car payment. Matthew doesn't understand what it's like to struggle financially because he doesn't. His parents helped him buy his condo. He's never had to choose between rent and eating. So when David offered that much just to meet up, I didn't immediately say no. I told myself it was fine because Matthew and I weren't technically official yet. We hadn't had the conversation. I wasn't cheating because we weren't actually together. But even I knew that was bullshit. We were sleeping together. We were spending weekends together. I had a drawer at his place. We were together in every way that mattered except the label. Still, I didn't say no to David right away. I left him on read for a while, which I never did. David was used to quick responses from me, but I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do. Then Matthew and I had the conversation, officially together. Relationship status updated. The whole thing. And I still didn't tell David I had a boyfriend. I stopped responding to his messages. Yeah, but I didn't block him. I didn't explain why I was suddenly unavailable. I just Went quiet, which was cruel, honestly. After 9 years of regular contact, I basically ghosted him. But I kept reading his messages. He'd send these long DMs asking if I was okay, if something was wrong, apologizing for suggesting we meet up if that had made me uncomfortable. And I'd read every single one. I told myself I was just keeping tabs on the situation, making sure he wasn't getting weird or threatening. But really? It felt good, having someone miss me that much. Someone who actually noticed when I disappeared. Matthew never would have noticed if I went quiet for a few days. He'd probably just assume I was busy with work. The third lie, and this is the one that really gets me because it was so obvious, was that I was protecting him from unnecessary hurt. I convinced myself that keeping David's secret was actually the kind thing to do. Like, why burden Matthew with details about my past that didn't affect our future? What he didn't know couldn't hurt him, right? But I wasn't protecting Matthew. I was protecting myself. I was protecting my image as the kind of girlfriend who didn't have complicated baggage. I was protecting my right to keep getting those ego boosts from David without having to explain or justify them. Because here's what I didn't want to admit. I liked having David in my back pocket. I liked knowing that if things with Matthew didn't work out, I had someone who thought I was amazing. Someone who paid attention to me, who remembered things I said, who never took me for granted. Matthew was sweet. He was stable. But sweet starts to feel weak after a while, you know? And stable can feel boring when you're used to someone who hangs on your every word. David made me feel powerful, desired, like I had something valuable that people would pay for. Matthew made me feel comfortable, safe. Which sounds nice in theory, but in practice it's just kind of flat. So I kept my options open without calling it that. I told myself I was being mature by not dumping my whole sexual history on Matthew right away. I told myself I was being considerate by not making him deal with my work stuff. Really, I was being selfish and cowardly. And I think part of me knew that if I told Matthew the truth, he might not want to be with me anymore. So I just didn't tell him until he found out anyway. I was at his place one weekend, taking a shower, and my laptop was open on his kitchen table. I'd been messaging with my friend about work drama and just left Discord open when I went to shower. Matthew wasn't snooping. Exactly. My laptop made some notification sound and he glanced over to see if it was important. And there it was. 9 years of message history with David. Pictures, videos, the whole thing. When I got out of the shower, Matthew was sitting on his couch staring at his phone. He didn't look angry. He looked empty. Like someone had just explained something to him that he'd been trying not to understand. "We need to talk," he said, and his voice was so quiet, I almost didn't hear him. He didn't yell, he didn't call me names. He just asked questions in this flat, tired voice. How long? How much money? Did I meet up with him? Was I planning to? Did I tell David about us? I tried to explain about the timing, about how it was before we were official, about how I'd stopped responding once we got serious. But every answer I gave just made him look more tired. "You were gonna meet him for sex," Matthew said. "For money, while we were dating." "But we weren't official yet," I said. He laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "Right? We weren't official." Then he asked me to leave. Not permanently, he said. He just needed to think. But I could see it in his face. He was done. He was already gone. I tried calling him the next day, and the day after that. He'd respond to my texts with one-word answers. Fine. Busy. Can't. 3 weeks later, I saw him at our friend Jake's birthday party. He was with someone new. Some girl from his work who wore cardigans and had this quiet way of laughing at his jokes that made my chest feel tight. She wasn't prettier than me. She wasn't more interesting. But she was there, and I wasn't, and Matthew looked at her the way he used to look at me before I fucked it all up. Between us? I think he'd been looking for an excuse to end things anyway. Maybe he sensed something was off. Maybe I wasn't as good at compartmentalizing as I thought. Maybe he was just tired of dating someone who kept parts of herself locked away from him. Or maybe he just realized he deserved someone who didn't lie to him for months about having a 9-year relationship with another man, even if it was just business. I haven't talked to David since Matthew found those messages. I finally sent him one last message explaining that I was in a relationship now and couldn't continue our arrangement. He was actually really sweet about it, wished me well, said he'd miss talking to me, which was more grace than I probably deserved. Look, I'm not saying I was perfect. I know how this looks. I know. But you have to understand, I never meant for it to go this far. I never meant to hurt anyone. I just thought I could handle both things at once. I thought I was smarter than the situation. Turns out I wasn't. So yeah. 3 lies. They sound reasonable when you're living them. They sound like the kind of thing any woman in my position would tell herself. But lies are still lies, even when they make perfect sense to you. Don't do what I did. Or do. I can't stop you. I couldn't even stop me. Just know that compartmentalization only works until it doesn't. And when it falls apart, it takes everything with it. I mean, I learned my lesson. I think. I hope. I just learned it too late for Matthew. That's the part that keeps me up at night.